All right, good morning, Bio 202 students. This is going to be the focus session 2 to wrap up the endocrine section and kind of to help to prepare for the exam. So agenda, we'll talk about some announcements. We'll do a little bit of review, talk about water and the love-hate relationship, talk about communications that happen between the cell, and then go over my study guide top 3. So announcements, the endocrine practice exercise was due tonight. This is a Tuesday. Um, And so those practice exercises, I do recommend doing them. They're very good to help you get a sense of how the questions will be worded on the exams. More importantly, these practice exercises will all uh, be made to be worth 5 points at the end of the semester. So what I mean by that is if you take the practice exercise and you get like 2 out of 5 at the end of the semester, as long as you attempted it, Dr. Curley will make those all worth 5 points. So it doesn't matter what grade you get on it, but if you attempt it, you'll get full credit for it at the end of the semester. And those points could definitely help if you're on the edge of like a C to a B to A, or a D to a C. So I recommend getting them done. Again, it doesn't really necessarily matter if you get 5 out of 5 correct right now. The whole idea is just to attempt them, and you'll get full credit for it at the end of the semester anyway. The other thing is the endocrine system quiz. That is due Thursday. And then we have the endocrine exam, which will open up on Friday, the 12th, and it will close on Sunday evening on the 14th. So you'll have 3 days to start the exam. And then one thing to note is if you finish the exam and you feel like you want to retake it using Dr. Curley's token policy, you have 24 hours from the time you submit your exam to let her know that you want to retake it. After that, I think you only get about another 2 or 3 days to take it. And you can't go back and redo these. So if you get to the end of the semester, you have tokens left, and you say, you know what, I want to retake the endocrine system, it doesn't work that way. So you got to make that decision within 24 hours of completing the exam, whether you want to retake the exam or not. Um, what I've been telling people, at least in the in-person group that met with me, if the grade's like a C um, or above, I wouldn't consider retaking it. You'll have plenty of other opportunities to use those tokens, either on assignments or other exams. But if you get like a D or even like an F, and you feel like you can do a little bit better, um, I would recommend using it then. The biggest thing is really understanding, will you have the time to study for the additional 2 or 3 days that Dr. Curley gives you to retake the test, um, to have a big change in the grade. Um, so if you have any questions about that, just reach out to me. But what I've been telling them is, you only get to retake 2 exams, not including the final. And so if you use this token now and your grade is, borderline okay, you might lose the opportunity to retake an exam in the future that you may actually need. But again, ultimately, that's your decision. You do what you need to do for whatever grade goals that you have for this class. And then I recommend everyone check out Dr. Curley's exam breakdown announcement. She sends this out the week of every exam, and gives you an exact breakdown of the questions that will be on this test. And I'll kind of go over those here in the next slide. So for this exam, it's going to be worth 50 points. You're going to have 24 questions. You can kind of see the breakdown, one question for the hypothalamus and pituitary gland relationship, one glucose regulation, one endocrine versus nervous system question, 9 general endocrine system questions, talking about hormones, glands, receptors, target issues, 3 hormone property questions, uh, 2 matching hormones with their functions, 2 cell to cell, and then 5 endocrine disorders. And then these questions will be broken down by multiple choice, multiple drop downs, matching, and multiple blanks, but you do not need to write in any answers. So for the most part, um, you'll just have to either select the correct answer or drop down the correct answer, but you won't have to, think of words by yourself. So it should make it a little easier. What I've highlighted here are the topics that uh, will be covered in some of the next slides. And that'll account for 18 of the 24 questions. Endocrine disorders, you're on your own on that one. I think those are fairly straightforward. The questions could be asked in a way to either give you symptoms and then ask you what the disorder is, or the question could ask you what are some symptoms of this disorder, and then you would, select the symptoms. But that's all in your notes. Make sure you review those, especially considering that 5 of those questions will be endocrine disorders. Okay, so if you did not watch my endocrine system 1 video, I recommend you go back and watch that. But I did cover this. Um, I did want to share this again for those that may not have seen it. By this point, everything on this chart should be pretty um, self-explanatory and straightforward. You should be able to understand what each of these hormones are, where they act, and ultimately what target organs they go to, and what those hormones ultimately do in the body. I did have a discussion with the Monday group, or sorry, the in-person group. You'll see that I have prolactin inhibiting and prolactin release hormones. I don't believe those are on your notes anymore. You have some new ones like somatostatin. Um, Melatonin's talked a little bit more in this one. These are my notes from 2.5 years ago, so these are the hormones I got tested on. This chart isn't supposed to be your answer guide. It was more of a how to put your information together in a one-page slide. So feel free to substitute any of the hormones I have in here, remove anything that does not apply to your class. But in general, the idea was, can you group your hormones in a way where you could understand where they're produced, like these orange are produced in the hypothalamus, blue secreted by the posterior pituitary gland, green is hormones or where they act on the anterior pituitary, and then red was hormones produced by the anterior pituitary gland. And then you can kind of see that I go into the organs, the target systems, see the gonads, the mammary glands, the thyroid, adrenal glands, or growth hormone goes to everything. And then what happens afterwards. So, um, and then a very brief description of the function of those hormones. Um, I'll use, TRH, for example, thyroid releasing hormone, gets produced by the hypothalamus, gets then secreted, and then acts on the anterior pituitary gland. The anterior pituitary gland will then create thyroid stimulating hormone, which will then get secreted. It'll make its way to the thyroid. It'll act on the thyroid to produce T3 and T4 hormone, which is responsible for metabolism, growth, and temperature regulation, among other things. That one word or that little sentence by now should make sense. The start of the road here at the hypothalamus and the end at the production of the T3T hormones and what they do. You should be able to do that for every hormone that was in the chart that Dr. Curley gave you all at the beginning of the semester. If you are still struggling with that, please, please, please use the next couple of days to look that over. Like I mentioned before, that is 9 questions will be from that chart or from what you see in front of you right here. You can do well on the test if you don't get some of these other ones, especially the one question questions. But if you're not looking at endocrine system, hormones, glands, receptors, target issues, and if you're still struggling with that to this point, really buckle down and start looking at that, because that is going to make or break your exam for this one. Okay, so this was another topic that I think we struggled with a little bit in lecture from what I got from Dr. Curley. And so this is my way of breaking down these hormones. You've got the hydrophobics, which hate water, the hydrophilics, which love water. Um, Lipids or fats and water don't like each other. If you've ever used oil and then try to wipe it off or clean it with water afterwards, it's fairly difficult to do sometimes because water and oil do not like to mix. You always need something like a soap to force the oil and the water to interact. Um, so the hydrophobic hormones are actually fat-based hormones. So our cell membranes, if you remember Bio 181, if you're taking any chemistry class, our cell membranes are lipid-based. They have basically two fat tails that are facing against each other, and it creates a nice little barrier against things like water because water doesn't like fat. Um, Hydrophobic hormones, because they are fat-based, they are attracted to the fat cell membrane or the fat-based or lipid-based cell membrane. And so those hydrophobic hormones can easily pass through that membrane, go into the cell, and then act on what's called intracellular receptors. So intra is inside, so inside cell receptors. That's the best way I can describe it. The the big takeaway for this one though is what types of hormones are hydrophobic versus which types are hydrophilic. And that goes back to this hormone property question. So steroid hormones are fat or lipid-based hormones, and those will include all your sex hormones, testosterone, progesterone, estrogen, the adrenal cortex hormones. Um, so you have aldosterone, cortisol, and again, testosterone, estrogen, and then your t thyroid hormones, T3 and T4. So if the question asks, and a question could ask this in a very different way. But one way that I could ask this is drop down give me every hydrophobic hormone on this list. And you might be given a list of, let's say, 10 hormones. Anytime you see hydrophobic, you should think steroids. That's sex hormones, adrenal cortex hormones, thyroid hormones. Anything else that is not these types of hormones is hydrophilic. So if you study the hydrophobic hormones, and you get asked a question about what's a hydrophilic hormone, if you know what the hydrophobic hormones are, then you know not to answer them for the hydrophilic hormones. This is probably the easiest way to put this together. So hopefully this helps you all during the exam. And then the hydrophilic hormones are water-based because they do not like the lipid-based cell membrane. They cannot pass through. So what happens is the hydrophilic hormones have to act on membrane-bound receptors. So these are little receivers on top of the cell membrane. The hydrophilic hormone then acts on it, and then there's another receptor on the other end of the cell wall that sends the signal to the cell to tell it to produce whatever effects the hormone told it to do. So here's a kind of a general breakdown of hydrophilic transport. So again, hydrophobic hormones, they are fat-based, they don't like water. Our blood is primarily water, so it cannot travel in the blood alone. It would not make it into the blood. So it needs a protein to basically Uber it from the secreting gland through the blood vessel highway and then drop it off, not necessarily in front of the target cell, but maybe like the street next to it or some parking lot or something. So then it drops it off close to the cell it needs to go to. The hydrophobic hormone gets out of the Uber protein, and then it starts going in. And again, because the hydrophobic hormone is lipid-based, it'll pass through this cell membrane, and then it's able to go into the cell and then tell the cell, I need you to do this. I need you to grow. I need you to produce more testosterone, whatever it might be. On the flip side, the hydrophilic hormones are water-based. So the water hormones don't need an Uber. They have their own car. They can get into the water highway or the blood vessel highway, drive all the way to where they need to go. They can get out of the off the freeway, and then they have to go to the outside of the cell and wait there and basically dock or attach to the receptor. And then what happens is a receptor on the inside would then get that signal, and then it would then go inside the cell to tell it whatever it needs to be, whatever it needs to do. Um, think about like your Ring camera. The hydrophilic hormone has to sit outside your door and then rings the doorbell. The Ring camera signals on the inside and has to tell you that, hey, someone's on the outside. They want you to do something. Hopefully that analogy kind of makes sense for the Uber and then the Ring camera. Okay, and then the other one is communication. I think there was two questions on this. Yep, yep, two cell-to-cell signal. Basically, I just kind of broke down the different types of ways cells can communicate with each other. How this question might be asked, I don't 100% know, but I have seen um, this is a great like matching question. So I give you four the four ways of communication on one end, and I give you four the four definitions on the other, and then you mix and match. I think that's probably one of the better ways to do this question. But another question could ask you like describe paracrine signaling, for example. And then you have to select from an option of A through D. But gap junctions. So what happens is the cells are touching each other and there's little pores in between the cells. So the cells can send signals, hormones, chemicals, whatever, from one cell to another to communicate information. Things like our cardiac cells, some of our muscle cells communicate this way because they're directly touching and the signal just goes from one cell to another, kind of in that touching line. Paracrine signaling is cells that signal to other cells that are very close, but they're not touching. Uh, Two examples I have here. One is interferon. You won't hear this term often in Bio 202, but you might hear it in Bio 205. But essentially what happens is when a cell is infected with a virus or a bacteria is infected, our cells will kind of start ringing the alarm for the body, and they'll produce these things called interferons. So these interferon signals will go to all of the neighboring cells, and it'll tell the other cells, hey, I'm infected with something. You need to protect yourself from it. So the other cells around this infected cell will start producing proteins um, and prepare to defend themselves against the infection. So once that initial cell dies and that virus, I'll just use virus as the example, goes to infect the cells around it, the neighbor cells, those cells are already ready to go. And when this virus tries to infect them, the cells can defend themselves. That is an example of paracrine signaling, where the cells around each other are talking to each other, telling them, hey, I'm infected. You guys have to save yourselves. Unfortunately, the cell that's infected does not get saved. It will eventually die. It's like if my house caught on fire, I could probably warn my neighbors that my house is on fire so that they prepare their home so their houses don't get caught on fire. But unfortunately, my house is already on fire. It's probably going to burn down, and then I got to go do a bunch of other stuff. Another thing is blood clotting. So whenever you have a clot, you'll have um, or when you have a tear, I'll say a tear in your blood vessel, you'll get some chemicals released into your blood stream that tells the platelets like, hey, I'm broken. I need you to come over here. And once those platelet cells that are circulating in our bloodstream pick that up, they'll start going there. Then the platelets start releasing other chemicals to attract other platelets, but also red blood cells to the location to try to clot or plug that hole. That's an example of paracrine signaling. Autocrine signaling, that's just internal cell communication. So even inside the cells, we have things that are smaller. We've got the nucleus, we've got all of the smooth and rough endoplasmic reticulums, we've got ribosomes, we've got a bunch of other stuff in there. So all of that stuff still has to communicate with each other, and that's part of autocrine signaling. So the signals don't leave the cell, they stay inside the cell. Kind of as I was talking to my dog or my wife, we're still communicating inside our home, but nothing is getting outside of the home. And then endocrine, that's what we're learning in this course, especially in this lecture. That's all long distance communication between different organs or organ systems. So think hypothalamus, that's one part of the body, communicates to, let's say, the gonads, which are your reproductive organs. That's a different part of the body. And it has to be able to communicate between that part of the body up in my head all the way to my pelvic area. Endocrine signaling is typically very slow, and it's more of a systemic effect. What I mean by that is if I secrete a hormone into my bloodstream, it does go to that specific target organ, but it also has to kind of make its way down there by passing a bunch of other stuff. Whereas you think of like a nervous system or a nervous cell, if I tell my leg to move, it moves right away. That signal is straight from my brain to the nerves in my leg, and I just kick. Hopefully that makes sense for this question. Um, and again, I gave you a couple examples of how this could be asked on the exam. All right, lastly, I don't know if I highlighted this one. Blood glucose regulation. Okay. We spend a lot of time talking about this on in lecture, in the class. Like I said, I guarantee this question will be on your exam. Um, uh, one either a, hey, I have you just ate. What happens in your body to regulate your blood sugar to bring it back to homeostasis? Or the other is, hey, you've been fasting for a while. What happens in your body to regulate the blood sugar and then get you back to homeostasis? Um, Let me see, what am I at right now? Anyway, so we did, like I said, we spent a lot of time talking about this in class. In general, what you should visualize this is if I'm eating or if I've just eaten, I'm well fed. I'm in a well fed state. So what happens is I eat my coffee, my donut, whatever. That glucose in the food will then start being digested in my stomach. That takes about 2 to 4 hours. And then it gets absorbed in the small intestine. And in the small intestine, that those nutrients, the carbs, the lipids, proteins, etc., those all get distributed to all my other cells via my blood vessels. So during this case, if I eat, my blood sugar is going to increase. Because my blood sugar is higher, my body starts secreting insulin, specifically the pancreas, beta cells secrete insulin. That insulin will then tell my other cells, I need you to start storing some of this excess glucose because our blood sugar's a little high. So it's going to start converting, either it's going to allow the cells to take in the glucose to then use that as ATP for energy. Or if the cells don't need glucose at that time, or if they're full, then it'll start converting glucose into glycogen, which is stored sugar, and it gets stored in the liver. As this happens, your blood sugar will decrease, and you'll eventually get back to homeostasis, and your blood level will return to lower. Your blood sugar level returns to normal. The other scenario is you're in the fasting state. So I told you it takes about 2 to 4 hours to digest and absorb all your food, all the nutrients. Um, if you haven't eaten for, let's say 4 to 5 hours, you technically start the fasting state. It's not a big fast, but you do technically start fasting. And so what happens is your blood sugar will gradually decrease to the point that you're no longer in homeostasis. Because your blood sugar is low, the alpha cells in your pancreas will secrete glucagon. Glucagon will then go to the liver, and it says skeletal muscles, but primarily the liver, and it'll start breaking down the glycogen and converting it to glucose for energy. Another thing that our body does is it doesn't just store um, gly glu gly ah, sorry, it doesn't store oh my God, why can't I say the word? Sorry, I'm like I'm like flipped up overnight. Anyway, our body doesn't just store energy in the liver, glucose in the liver. It also stores it in our fat tissue, or it'll create new fat tissue in any spots in our body to store excess glucose. But the glucagon will start breaking glycogen down into glucose. That will then get released into your bloodstream to start bringing your blood level back up, your blood glucose level back up, and eventually you'll reach homeostasis and be good to go. So I talked through both of the scenarios. I gave a lot of little examples and um, details about it. Again, for the exam, I guarantee you're going to get asked a question, one or the other, if you're going to be in the fasting state or the well-fed state, and you got to be able to describe and talk your way through it. The questions, like I said, it could still be like multiple choice, or this might be a good drop-down question where it's like in the blah state, and you put well-fed or fasting, blood sugar will drop or increase, leading to the release of, you know, insulin or glucagon by the beta or alpha cells, that kind of thing. That would be a good question if I was making an exam. Or I could just ask you like 5 different questions in a row of all the parts that we talked about here today. Okay. That's all I really had. My last thing here is I told you guys you have an exam study guide. So for the endocrine exam study guide, these are my top 3 review questions that I would, if I only had 15 minutes to study, these are the 3 questions I would make sure I could answer. So question 3, the hypothalamus pituitary relationship, which includes all of the hormones, the receptors, where they act, etc. Question 7, which is the endocrine glands. So that kind of goes back to what does each endocrine gland do and what do they do in the body? Think the pineal gland and melatonin, think pancreas and the beta cells, alpha cells that release glucagon or insulin, that kind of thing. That's what I'm talking about. And then review question 8, like I mentioned, insulin and glucagon relationship and how changes in your body will affect one or two of both of these hormones. Okay, that's all I have for you. Thank you very much for watching this session. For those watching online that need to get credit for attendance, trying to think of actually just send me a Canvas message and give me the word insulin and glucagon. If you say that in the Canvas message, then I'll know that you watched this and I will give you credit for attendance. Other than that, good luck on your exam. Thank you for watching, and please reach out if you have any questions before Friday. All right, I'll talk to you soon.